The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before opening it that Patricia Weatherby had found another reason to make my life miserable. I'm Yates Patterson, and I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania for 3 years now. I bought the 5-acre property specifically because it had a large barn and enough space to run my seed cleaning business. The development was marketed as rural residential living, which seemed perfect for someone like me who processed organic grain for regional farmers. When I moved in, I made sure to check every rule, every regulation, every single line of the HOA covenant. Agricultural equipment was listed as permitted, provided it wasn't visible from the main road. My seed cleaner sat well inside my barn, a good 300 feet from the nearest neighbor. But Patricia Weatherby didn't care about facts or rules. She cared about control. I tore open the envelope and scanned the letter. My jaw tightened with each word. According to Patricia and her HOA board, my industrial equipment violated community standards and created an agricultural disturbance that negatively impacted property values. I had 30 days to remove the seed cleaner or face daily fines of $500 a day. For equipment that was completely within the rules, I walked out to the barn, letter still clutched in my hand. The morning sun filtered through the old wooden slats, illuminating dust motes in golden shafts of light. My seed cleaner stood in the center of the space, a beautiful piece of machinery that had cost me $40,000 when I'd bought it 2 years ago. It wasn't some rusty relic. This was a state-of-the-art Oliver gravity separator with air aspiration, capable of processing wheat, oats, barley, and various specialty grains to organic certification standards. Right now, I had contracts with 14 farmers across Lancaster, Lebanon, and Berks counties. These weren't hobby farmers either. We were talking about serious operations, some of them 4th and 5th generation family farms that supplied organic flour to bakeries from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. Without my processing capability, they'd have to truck their grain all the way to Harrisburg or beyond, adding significant cost and time to their operations. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus, one of my oldest clients. "Yates, I've got 3 tons of spring wheat ready for cleaning. Can you take it Friday?" I looked at the letter again, then at my seed cleaner. "Yeah, Marcus, Friday works fine. Everything okay? You sound stressed. Just HOA nonsense, nothing I can't handle." After we hung up, I sat down at my workbench and pulled out my copy of the HOA covenant. I'd read it cover to cover before buying the property, and I'd read it a dozen times since then, whenever Patricia tried to pull something. Section 7.3 clearly stated that agricultural equipment was permitted on properties over 3 acres, provided it was housed in an appropriate structure and not visible from Meadowbrook Drive, the main entrance road. I checked every box. My property was 5 acres. The equipment was in a barn. You couldn't see the barn from the main road at all. Hell, you could barely see it from my own driveway because of the way the land sloped and the row of maple trees I'd planted along the property line. I needed to understand what Patricia was actually claiming. The letter mentioned complaints from neighbors and regular disturbances, but it was vague on specifics. I decided to go straight to the source. Patricia lived in a pristine colonial at the entrance of the development, her house positioned like a watchtower overlooking everyone who came and went. Her lawn was always perfect, her flower beds always coordinated by season, her shutters always freshly painted. She'd been HOA president for 7 years, and according to my neighbor Tom, she'd driven out at least 4 families in that time with her constant harassment. I knocked on her door at 2 o'clock that afternoon. She answered wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and enough perfume to choke a horse. "Yates," she said, not quite managing to hide her annoyance. "I assume you received our letter." "I did. That's why I'm here. I need clarification on what rules I'm supposedly violating." She adjusted her glasses. A gesture I'd learned meant she was about to recite something she'd rehearsed. "Your industrial seed processing operation creates excessive noise, attracts vermin, and generates truck traffic that's inappropriate for a residential community. The covenant specifically allows agricultural equipment," I said, keeping my voice level. "I checked before I bought the property. That provision was intended for small-scale gardening equipment, not commercial industrial operations." "That's not what it says. It doesn't specify scale, and my operation isn't industrial, it's agricultural. There's a difference." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "The board has interpreted the covenant and we've made our decision. You have 30 days. I'd like to appeal to the full board. You can submit a written appeal which we'll review at our next quarterly meeting." "When's that?" 2 months from now. "Your letter gives me 30 days. She shrugged, a small gesture that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about rules or property values. This was about power. Patricia had decided she didn't like my business, and she was going to use whatever authority she had to shut it down. "I'll see you at the next board meeting," I said, and left before I said something I'd regret. Back home, I called my lawyer, Jim Davidson. Jim was a property attorney in Lancaster who'd helped me with the purchase of my house. I scanned the HOA letter and emailed it to him, then called to explain the situation. "They don't have a leg to stand on," Jim said after I'd finished. "Agricultural equipment is explicitly permitted in your covenant, and you meet all the specified conditions. How much noise does this thing make?" "When it's running, about as much as a vacuum cleaner, and I only run it maybe 6 hours a week, never before 8 in the morning or after 6 at night. It's not loud. Any legitimate complaints from neighbors? None that I know of. And my closest neighbor is Tom Henderson, 300 yards away. He's actually thanked me for keeping the barn maintained. The previous owner let it fall apart." Jim was quiet for a moment. "Here's what we do. First, you send a written response to the HOA, clearly outlining how you comply with Section 7.3 of the covenant. Reference the specific language. Be professional but firm. Second, demand a special board meeting to address this before the 30-day deadline. They're required to provide that under Pennsylvania HOA law if a member requests it for a time-sensitive issue. Third, document everything. When you run the equipment, keep a log. When trucks come, photograph them and note the times. If any neighbors complain, get it in writing. You think it'll go to court? If Patricia is as unreasonable as you say?" "Yeah, probably. But you'll win. This is clearly an overreach, and the courts don't look kindly on HOA boards that ignore their own governing documents." I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting my response. I quoted Section 7.3 verbatim. I included photographs showing that my barn wasn't visible from the main road. I attached my business license, which classified my operation as agricultural services, not industrial manufacturing. I documented my equipment specifications, showing that the sound output was within residential limits. I requested a special board meeting within 14 days. I hand-delivered the response to Patricia's house the next morning. She wasn't home, so I left it in her mailbox with a timestamp photo for my records. Then I went back to work. Marcus showed up Friday morning with his spring wheat, 3 tons of beautiful organic grain in his flatbed truck. We spent 2 hours running it through the seed cleaner, removing chaff, broken kernels, and any foreign material. The machine hummed steadily, doing its job with the precision that made it worth every penny I'd paid. "Heard you're having trouble with the HOA," Marcus said as we bagged the cleaned grain. Word traveled fast in farming communities. "Patricia Weatherby thinks my equipment is industrial." Marcus laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "Industrial? My grandmother had noisier kitchen appliances." "What's her problem?" "Control. She doesn't like that someone in her development runs a business. Half the people here probably work from home. What's the difference?" "The difference is that mine involves farmers in trucks instead of accountants in Priuses." Marcus shook his head. "You need backup at that board meeting, you let me know. I'll bring documentation about what you do for the farming community. USDA organic certification isn't a joke. Without processors like you, small farms can't compete." After Marcus left, I noticed a car idling on the road near my driveway. A silver Lexus, Patricia's car. She sat there for 15 minutes watching before finally driving away. I made a note of the time and took a photo. If she wanted documentation, I'd give her documentation. The weekend passed quietly. I processed 2 more loads, one for a farmer named Sarah who grew heritage wheat varieties, and another for a cooperative of Amish farmers who needed their barley cleaned for malting. Both jobs went smoothly. Both clients left satisfied. Monday morning, I got an email from the HOA board secretary, a woman named Linda Mortensen. The board had agreed to a special meeting, scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening at the community center. I was given 15 minutes to present my case. 15 minutes. I'd need to make them count. I spent the week preparing. Jim helped me put together a presentation with photos, sound level measurements, traffic analysis, and testimonials from my clients. I gathered letters from my immediate neighbors, including Tom, stating they had no issues with my business. I pulled my property survey showing the exact distance from my barn to the main road. I even got a letter from the county zoning office confirming that my operation was properly licensed and compliant with all local regulations. Tuesday evening arrived with a thunderstorm brewing on the horizon. The community center was a small brick building near the entrance of Meadowbrook Estates, featuring a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I arrived at 6:45, Patricia and 4 other board members were already seated at a long table facing rows of folding chairs. I recognized all of them. Patricia, of course, Linda Mortensen, the secretary who ran some kind of consulting business from home, Robert Chen, a retired engineer who always seemed uncomfortable at these meetings, Deborah Walsh, who owned a boutique in downtown Lancaster, and Frank Morrison, a real estate agent who'd sold half the houses in the development. About 20 residents were scattered in the chairs, more than usual. Patricia must have drummed up an audience. Jim arrived just before 7, carrying his briefcase. Ready, as I'll ever be. Patricia called the meeting to order precisely at 7. She read through some standard administrative items, then moved to what she called the Patterson matter. Yates Patterson has requested this special meeting to address the board's notice regarding his industrial equipment. "Mr. Patterson, you have 15 minutes. I stood up, connected my laptop to the projector, and began. "Thank you for meeting on short notice. I want to address the concerns in your letter and explain why I believe my seed cleaning operation is fully compliant with our community covenant." I clicked to my first slide, which showed Section 7.3 of the covenant in large, clear text. This section explicitly permits agricultural equipment on properties over 3 acres, provided it's housed in an appropriate structure and not visible from Meadowbrook Drive. My property is 5 acres. My equipment is housed in a barn that was built in 1947 and is original to the property. And as these photos show, the barn cannot be seen from Meadowbrook Drive at any point. I advanced through several photos taken from different angles along the main road. The barn was completely hidden by trees and terrain. Now, regarding noise complaints, I've conducted professional sound level measurements. When operating, my seed cleaner produces approximately 65 decibels, which is equivalent to a normal conversation or a dishwasher. For context, a lawnmower produces about 90 decibels. I've also logged my operating hours for the past month. I run the equipment an average of 6 hours per week, always between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening on weekdays. Next slide showed my operating log with dates, times, and duration. Regarding truck traffic, I receive an average of 3 delivery and pickup trucks per week. That's less traffic than households with regular landscaping services or families with teenage drivers. I've documented every vehicle that's come to my property for business purposes in the last 60 days. The traffic log appeared on screen, complete with photos showing that the trucks were standard farming vehicles, not 18-wheelers or industrial haulers. Now, let me explain what I actually do, because I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of my work. I'm not running a factory. I'm providing an essential agricultural service to regional organic farmers. I clicked to a slide showing photos of grain before and after cleaning. This is organic wheat from a farm in Lebanon County. These farmers grow crops without pesticides or chemical fertilizers, and they need their grain cleaned to USDA organic standards before it can be sold for food use. Without processors like me, these small and medium-sized farms would have to truck their grain 50 or 100 miles to the nearest facility, which would make their operations economically unviable. Another slide showed a map of Lancaster, Lebanon, and Berks counties, with dots indicating my clients' locations. I currently process grain for 14 farms across 3 counties. These aren't hobby operations. We're talking about working farms that have been in families for generations, producing food that ends up in bakeries, restaurants, and grocery stores throughout Pennsylvania. I could see some of the residents leaning forward, paying attention. This was new information for them. I have letters here from several of my clients, explaining how my services support their operations. I also have letters from my immediate neighbors stating that my business doesn't negatively impact their enjoyment of their properties. I clicked through excerpts from the letters, then moved to my final slide. I love this community. I bought my property specifically because it offered the space and zoning to run my business while living in a nice neighborhood. I've maintained my property, paid my HOA dues on time, and operated my business professionally and legally. I'm in full compliance with the covenant, and I respectfully ask the board to withdraw its notice. I sat down. I'd used 13 of my 15 minutes. Patricia cleared her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Does anyone else wish to speak?" Tom Henderson stood up from the back row. I hadn't noticed him come in. "I'm Tom Henderson. I live directly adjacent to Yates's property. I want to say that he's been an excellent neighbor. His business doesn't bother me at all. I barely know when he's working. And honestly, that barn looks 100% better since he fixed it up." A woman I didn't recognize raised her hand. "I'm Janet Cooper. I live on Willow Lane. I just want to say that I think it's wonderful that someone in our community is supporting local farmers. We all talk about buying organic and supporting local agriculture, but here's someone actually making that possible, and we're trying to shut him down. That doesn't seem right." Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw Linda and Robert exchange glances. Another resident spoke, then another. The tide seemed to be turning. People were genuinely interested in what I did, and they didn't see my business as a threat. Finally, Patricia held up her hand. Thank you, everyone. The board will take this matter under advisement and issue a decision within 5 business days. Actually, Jim said, standing up, I'd like to speak if I may. I'm Jim Davidson, Mr. Patterson's attorney. I want to make something clear for the record. This isn't a matter that requires deliberation or interpretation. The covenant is explicit. Agricultural equipment is permitted under the specified conditions, and Mr. Patterson meets all those conditions. If the board proceeds with enforcement action, you'll be violating your own governing documents, and that opens the HOA to significant legal liability. Patricia's jaw tightened. Are you threatening the board, Mr. Davidson? I'm informing the board of the legal reality. If you fine Mr. Patterson or take any action against him for activity that's clearly permitted under the covenant, he will sue, and he will win. The court will likely award him attorney's fees and damages, which come out of the HOA's budget. That means every homeowner here will be paying for the board's mistake. The room got very quiet. Jim continued, his voice calm but firm. I'd also note that Pennsylvania law requires HOA boards to act reasonably and in good faith. Selectively enforcing rules or inventing interpretations that don't match the plain language of the covenant can expose board members to personal liability. I'm not trying to be adversarial here. I'm simply advising everyone involved to take a very careful look at the governing documents before proceeding. Frank Morrison, the real estate agent, spoke up. Can we see that section of the covenant again? I put the slide back up. Frank read it slowly, then looked at Patricia. It does say agricultural equipment is permitted. It doesn't specify scale or define what counts as agricultural. It was clearly intended for small-scale use, Patricia insisted. But that's not what it says, Robert Chen said quietly. If we meant to limit it to small scale, we should have written that. We can't just add restrictions that aren't in the text. Deborah Walsh nodded. I agree with Robert. I don't like setting precedents where we interpret rules based on what we think they should say instead of what they actually say. Patricia looked around the table and seemed to realize she was losing control. Fine. We'll take a vote. All in favor of withdrawing the notice against Mr. Patterson. Robert, Deborah, and Linda raised their hands. Opposed, Patricia and Frank raised their hands. The motion passes, Linda said. The notice is withdrawn. I felt tension I didn't know I was carrying drain from my shoulders. Thank you. Patricia gathered her papers, her movements sharp and angry. This meeting is adjourned. As people filed out, several residents came up to talk to me. Janet Cooper asked about where she could buy products made from the grain I processed. Tom clapped me on the shoulder and said he was glad things worked out. A younger guy named Chris, who lived 2 streets over, said he'd been thinking about starting a work-from-home business and was glad to see the community supporting entrepreneurs. Jim and I walked out to the parking lot together. The thunderstorm had passed without dropping any rain, leaving the air clean and cool. Well done in there, Jim said. Clear presentation, good facts, no emotion. That's how you win these things. Think she'll let it go? Jim glanced back at the community center, where Patricia was standing by her Lexus, talking intensely on her phone. Honestly, probably not. People like her don't like losing. But you won the board vote, and that's what matters legally. Just keep documenting everything and stay in compliance. If she tries anything else, we'll shut it down. I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic. I'd won the battle, but Jim was right. Patricia didn't strike me as someone who'd accept defeat gracefully. The next morning, I was out in the barn doing maintenance on the seed cleaner when I heard vehicles approaching. 2 trucks pulled up my driveway, County trucks. A man in his 50s climbed out of the first vehicle, carrying a clipboard. Yates Patterson, that's me. I'm Rick Shaw with the County Building Inspector's Office. We received a complaint about unpermitted commercial activity on this property. I need to inspect your barn and equipment. My stomach sank. Patricia was escalating. Sure, come on in. Everything's properly licensed, but you're welcome to inspect. Rick and his colleagues spent 45 minutes examining the barn, the seed cleaner, my electrical setup, and my business documentation. They took photos, made notes, and asked detailed questions about my operation. Finally, Rick looked up from his clipboard. Well, Mr. Patterson, I don't see any issues here. Your business license is current, your zoning classification is correct, your equipment is properly installed and maintained. The complaint mentioned unpermitted modifications to the barn, but everything I see is either original to the structure or properly documented with permits. So I'm good, you're good. I'll file a report saying the complaint was unfounded. Sorry to bother you. After they left, I called Jim and updated him. That's harassment, Jim said immediately. She's using county resources to harass you because she didn't get her way with the HOA. Document this. Save the inspector's report when you get it. If she keeps filing false complaints, we can go after her for abuse of process. The harassment continued in smaller ways over the next few weeks. Patricia sent me a letter claiming my fence needed repainting, even though it had been painted 6 months earlier. She complained that my lawn was overgrown, even though I'd mowed it 3 days before. She sent notices about my mailbox, my driveway, my barn door, finding fault with anything she could photograph from the road. I responded to every single complaint with photos, documentation, and references to the actual covenant requirements. Each time, my response proved the complaint was baseless. Each time, Patricia had to back down, but it was exhausting. I was spending hours every week dealing with her harassment instead of running my business. Then in early June, things got worse. I was processing a large order of oats for an Amish cooperative when I heard someone shouting. I shut down the seed cleaner and walked outside. Patricia was standing in my driveway, her face red, pointing at the farmer's truck that was being loaded with cleaned grain. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a commercial warehouse," she yelled. "This truck traffic is unacceptable." The farmer, an older Amish man named Daniel, looked deeply uncomfortable. His culture avoided confrontation, and Patricia was creating a scene. "Patricia, this is permitted activity," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We've been through this. I don't care what the board voted. This is wrong, and everyone knows it. You're running a business that doesn't belong here. I have every right to run this business on my property. The board confirmed that. You need to leave. I'll leave when you stop destroying property values with your little farm operation." Daniel finished loading his truck quickly and drove away with an apologetic wave. Patricia stood there for another minute, breathing hard, then jabbed her finger at me. "This isn't over," she said, then stalked back to her Lexus and sped away. I immediately went inside and wrote down everything she'd said, including the time and circumstances. I also called Daniel to apologize for the confrontation. "It is no trouble," Daniel said in his soft, deliberate way. "But perhaps I should send someone else for the next pickup. I do not wish to cause problems." "Daniel, you're not causing problems. She is. Please don't change your plans because of her. You're always welcome here." But I could hear the hesitation in his voice. Patricia's harassment wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was impacting my clients and my business relationships. That night, I sat down with Jim on a video call and laid out everything that had happened since the board meeting. "She's out of control," Jim said. And she's now interfering with your business operations, which moves this beyond HOA disputes into actual economic harm. Here's what I think we should do. We file a restraining order against her for harassment. We also send a letter to the full HOA board, documented and certified, explaining that Patricia is acting beyond her authority and creating legal liability for the association. Will that work? It'll force the board to rein her in. Right now, they probably don't know the extent of what she's doing. She's the president, so they assume she's acting appropriately. Once we document the pattern of harassment and make it clear that the HOA could be liable, they'll have to take action. We drafted the letter that night. It was 10 pages long, with an appendix documenting every single instance of harassment, every baseless complaint, every interaction since the board meeting. We sent it certified mail to all 5 board members, as well as to the HOA's registered agent. 3 days later, I got a call from Robert Chen. "Yates, this is Robert Chen from the board. I just got your letter, and I want you to know that I had no idea Patricia was doing all this. None of us did. I appreciate you calling, Robert. She's been handling most of the day-to-day HOA business, and we trusted her to operate within the board's decisions. Obviously, that's not happening. We're having an emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Would you be willing to attend? Of course." The emergency meeting took place in Linda Mortenson's living room instead of the community center. All 5 board members were there, along with Jim and me. The atmosphere was tense. Robert started the meeting. "Patricia, we've received a detailed complaint from Yates documenting multiple instances of harassment since the board voted to withdraw the notice against him. This is serious. Not only is it wrong, it exposes the HOA to significant liability." Patricia crossed her arms. "I've been enforcing our community standards. That's my job as president." "No," Linda said, her voice firm. "Your job is to implement board decisions. The board voted to withdraw the action against Yates. Your continued harassment contradicts that vote and exceeds your authority." "Everything I've done has been within the scope of the covenant," Patricia insisted. Jim opened his folder. "Actually, let's go through this. On May 18th, you filed a complaint with the county building inspector alleging unpermitted commercial activity. The inspector found no violations. Filing a false complaint is abuse of process. On May 23rd, you sent a notice claiming Mr. Patterson's fence needed repainting under Covenant Section 9.2. However, Section 9.2 requires fences to be maintained in good condition. Mr. Patterson's fence was painted 6 months ago and is in excellent condition. Your interpretation of needs painting was arbitrary and unsupported." He continued through the list, methodically dismantling each of Patricia's actions. By the end, even Frank Morrison, who'd voted with Patricia before, looked uncomfortable. "Patricia," Deborah said, "you've put the HOA in an impossible position. If Yates sues, we'll lose. And all of this happened because you couldn't accept a board vote that didn't go your way. So what? We're just going to let him run his industrial operation without any oversight." "It's not an industrial operation," Robert said, his voice rising for the first time. "We've been through this. He's providing agricultural services which are permitted. The operation is small, quiet, and fully compliant. The only problem here is your refusal to accept that." The room fell silent. Then Linda spoke. "I move that we remove Patricia Weatherby as HOA president, effective immediately, due to actions taken beyond her authority that have exposed the association to legal liability." "Second," Deborah said immediately. "Wait," Patricia said. "You can't just remove me. I was elected." "Actually," Robert said, Under our bylaws, the board can remove an officer by a majority vote if that officer has acted in a manner contrary to the association's interests. I think that clearly applies here. The vote was 4-1. Only Frank abstained. Patricia stood up, her face pale. Fine. You're all making a huge mistake, but fine. I'm done with this board anyway. She walked out, slamming the door behind her. Robert turned to me. Yates, on behalf of the board, I want to apologize. This should never have happened. We're going to send you a formal letter confirming that your business operations are in full compliance with the covenant and that you won't face any further harassment from the HOA. I appreciate that, Robert. We'd also like to invite you to join the board if you're interested. We could use someone with your perspective, and frankly, we need to rebuild trust with the community after this mess. I hadn't expected that. Can I think about it? Of course. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Jim and I left shortly after. In the car, he grinned. Well, that went better than expected. Is it really over with the HOA? Yes. Patricia has no authority anymore and the board is on your side, but keep your guard up. She seems like the type who might try something on her own. Jim was right to be cautious. 2 weeks later, I arrived home from a supply run in Lancaster to find my barn door open. I always kept it locked when I wasn't working. I approached carefully and looked inside. The seed cleaner had been vandalized. Someone had poured what looked like motor oil all over the machinery, damaged the electrical control panel, and smashed several of the delicate separation screens that made the machine work. I didn't touch anything. I immediately called the police. The Pennsylvania State Police sent a trooper named Officer Martinez. She took photos, dusted for fingerprints, and documented everything. The damage was extensive. I estimated at least $20,000 in repairs and replacement parts, plus the income I'd lose while the machine was out of service. Any idea who might have done this? Officer Martinez asked. I explained the situation with Patricia, including the timeline of harassment and her removal from the board. I'm not saying she did it, but she's the only person who's expressed hostility toward my business. We'll investigate. Do you have security cameras? No, I never thought I'd need them. You should get some. I'll be in touch. I spent the rest of the day calling my clients to explain that I'd have to delay their orders while I got my equipment repaired. Everyone was understanding, but I could tell this was disrupting their operations. Marcus offered to help me file insurance claims. Sarah said she'd write a statement for the police if it would help. The next morning, I was getting quotes from repair technicians when Officer Martinez called back. Mr. Patterson, we lifted some fingerprints from your equipment. We ran them through the system and got a hit. Patricia Weatherby. She has prints on file from a volunteer background check she did years ago. We're bringing her in for questioning. My stomach dropped. I'd suspected her, but having it confirmed was different. What happens now? We'll interview her. If she did this, she'll be charged with criminal mischief and possibly burglary since she entered your barn without permission. Given the dollar amount of damage, we're looking at felony charges. Patricia was arrested that afternoon. According to Officer Martinez, she'd initially denied everything, but when confronted with the fingerprint evidence, she'd broken down and confessed. She claimed she'd done it because I was destroying the character of the neighborhood, and the board had betrayed their duty by not stopping me. The confession didn't help her. The district attorney charged her with felony criminal mischief, burglary, and criminal trespass. Because the damage exceeded $5,000, the criminal mischief charge was a third-degree felony carrying up to 7 years in prison. Jim helped me file a civil lawsuit against Patricia for damages, lost income, and emotional distress. Between the criminal charges and the civil suit, Patricia was facing financial ruin and potential prison time. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. Patricia pleaded not guilty initially, and her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The DA wasn't interested in anything less than felony conviction given the deliberate and substantial nature of the damage. Meanwhile, I got my seed cleaner repaired. My insurance covered most of the cost, but I still had to pay a $5,000 deductible and deal with 6 weeks of downtime. I installed security cameras throughout my property, including inside the barn, along with better locks and a monitored alarm system. The community reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. Several residents stopped by to express their disgust at what Patricia had done. Janet Cooper organized a meal train for me during the repair period. Tom helped me install the security cameras. Even Frank Morrison, who'd been Patricia's ally on the board, came by to apologize for not recognizing what she was capable of. "I thought she was just passionate about community standards," Frank said, shaking his head. "I didn't realize she was actually unstable. I should have listened when you and the others raised concerns." In August, Patricia's case went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Her fingerprints were on the vandalized equipment. She'd confessed, and even though her lawyer tried to walk that back, the confession had been properly recorded. Security footage from a neighbor's camera showed her car driving toward my property around the time of the vandalism. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. At sentencing in September, I gave a victim impact statement. I explained how the vandalism had affected my business, my clients, and my sense of security in my own home. I talked about the farmers who'd been forced to find alternative processing during the 6 weeks my equipment was down, and how some of them had considered giving up organic certification because the logistics were so difficult. The judge sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She also had to pay full restitution for the damage and my lost income, which totaled $37,000. My civil lawsuit was still pending, but Jim was confident we'd win substantial damages beyond the criminal restitution, particularly for the emotional distress and the pattern of harassment that had led up to the vandalism. Patricia's husband divorced her while she was awaiting sentencing. He'd apparently had no idea about the extent of her harassment campaign and was horrified by what she'd done. He sold their house in Meadowbrook Estates and moved somewhere out of state. By October, life had settled into a new normal. My seed cleaner was running perfectly. I'd actually picked up 3 new clients because the news coverage of the case had raised awareness about local organic grain processing. The Amish cooperative had sent me a beautiful handmade thank you quilt, which now hung in my living room. I'd accepted Robert's invitation to join the HOA board. We'd actually made some good changes, including revising the covenant to be clearer about permitted business activities and establishing better procedures for handling complaints. We'd also implemented term limits for the president position to prevent anyone from accumulating too much power again. One evening in late October, I was out in the barn processing a load of winter wheat when Marcus stopped by. He'd finished his harvest early and wanted to check on how the cleaning was going. "Looks good," he said, watching the grain flow through the separator. "You know, Yates, you saved a lot of farms with this setup. When Patricia tried to shut you down, I was genuinely worried about what would happen to the organic producers in this region." "I was worried too," I admitted. "There were moments where I thought about just giving up and moving somewhere without an HOA. Glad you didn't. You stood your ground and it mattered." After Marcus left, I stood in the barn for a while, listening to the steady hum of the seed cleaner. The autumn air was crisp and cool, carrying the smell of harvested fields. Through the open barn door, I could see the lights of my house and, beyond that, the wooded hills of Lancaster County. I'd bought this property to build a life that combined my work with a sense of community. Patricia had tried to destroy that, but in a weird way, her actions had actually strengthened it. The ordeal had connected me more deeply with my neighbors, my clients, and the farming community. People understood what I did now and why it mattered. The civil lawsuit settled in December. Patricia's insurance paid $200,000, which covered my legal fees, the lingering business impacts, and compensation for the stress of the entire situation. Jim had argued successfully that the harassment had been severe and prolonged enough to warrant substantial damages beyond the direct costs of the vandalism. I used some of that money to expand my operation. I bought a second piece of cleaning equipment, specialized for smaller grains like quinoa and millet. I hired an assistant, a recent agriculture school graduate named Cole who was passionate about sustainable farming. And I started offering mobile processing services, taking equipment directly to farms that produced smaller volumes. Christmas that year felt particularly meaningful. The HOA board, which I was now part of, organized a community holiday party at the community center. It was better attended than any event in years, and the atmosphere was relaxed and friendly in a way that people said had been missing during Patricia's reign. Tom gave a toast, raising his glass of cider. Here's to good neighbors, second chances, and standing up for what's right. Everyone drank to that. In January, I got a letter from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture recognizing my contribution to the state's organic farming sector. Apparently, one of my clients had nominated me for a small business award. I didn't win, but the nomination itself felt like validation that what I did mattered beyond just making a living. Patricia was released on parole in March, after serving 18 months. I heard through the community grapevine that she'd moved to Ohio to live with a sister. She was prohibited from contacting me as a condition of her parole, and I had no desire to ever see her again. As far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed. Spring brought another busy season. Farmers started bringing in their stored grain for cleaning before planting season ramped up. Cole turned out to be an excellent hire, capable of running the equipment independently and even identifying issues I might have missed. We processed record volumes that spring, and I started getting inquiries from farmers in neighboring counties who'd heard about our service quality. One afternoon in April, a farmer I didn't know pulled up in a battered pickup truck. She introduced herself as Greta Vinson from Berks County. She grew ancient grain varieties, things like emmer and einkorn, for a specialty flour company. "I heard you're the guy who stood up to his HOA," Greta said with a grin. "I like that. Shows character. My processor retired last year, and I've been looking for someone who really understands organic standards and specialty grains. You interested in taking on another client?" "Absolutely. Let's talk about what you need." As Greta and I discussed her processing requirements, I realized how far I'd come since that certified letter arrived back in March of the previous year. What had started as a crisis had become an opportunity to prove the value of what I did and to build something stronger. The barn was no longer just a workspace. It was a hub for sustainable agriculture in the region, a place where farmers brought their grain with confidence, knowing it would be processed to the highest standards. The equipment that Patricia had tried to remove and then destroy was now running more efficiently than ever, serving more farmers and supporting more sustainable food production. That evening, after Greta left and Cole had gone home, I locked up the barn and walked back to the house. The maple trees I'd planted along the property line 3 years ago were filling out nicely, their new leaves bright green in the fading sunlight. The lawn was neatly mowed. The barn door had a fresh coat of paint. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it should be. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering if she understood the irony. She tried to drive me out because she thought my business diminished the community. Instead, her actions had demonstrated exactly why the community needed spaces for people to pursue meaningful work. The farmers I served weren't just clients. They were stewards of the land, growing food in ways that built soil health and ecosystem resilience. Supporting them wasn't a distraction from community values. It was an expression of those values. The HOA had learned something too. Under new leadership, the board had embraced a more flexible interpretation of what residential living could include. Several other residents had started small businesses from home, everything from consulting practices to artisan crafts. The covenant still maintained standards, but the enforcement was reasonable and focused on genuine quality of life issues rather than arbitrary control. In May, the community held its annual meeting to elect board members. Robert was re-elected as president. Linda remained as secretary. And I was elected vice president by a comfortable margin. People had noticed the work I'd done over the past year, both in fighting for my business and in helping reshape the board's approach to governance. During the meeting, a newer resident raised a question about whether we should tighten restrictions on business activities. Before anyone else could respond, Janet Cooper stood up. "I want to say something about that. Last year, I would have agreed with you. I thought residential neighborhoods should be purely residential. But then I watched what happened with Yates, and it changed my perspective. He's not running some disruptive operation. He's providing a service that supports local agriculture and sustainable food systems. And having him in our community makes us part of something bigger than just a nice place to live. It makes us part of the solution to real problems. We should be proud of that, not trying to regulate it away." Several people applauded. The motion to tighten restrictions never got a second. Summer brought long days of processing grain and maintaining equipment. Cole and I fell into an efficient rhythm, able to handle 2 or 3 farm deliveries a day when demand was high. We expanded the mobile service, traveling to farms within a 50-mile radius. The mobile setup was particularly popular with Amish farmers, who appreciated not having to arrange transportation for large grain loads. One July afternoon, we were processing organic spelt for a farmer named William when I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Patterson, this is Dean Foster from the Pennsylvania Organic Certification Board. I'm calling because we're developing a regional processing network to support small and mid-sized organic farms. Your name keeps coming up as someone who's doing excellent work in this space. Would you be interested in participating? The network," Dean explained, "would connect certified processors like me with farms throughout the state. It would include training programs, equipment grants, and coordination to ensure that no farm was too far from processing services." "This sounds great," I said. "What would participation involve?" "Initially, just agreeing to take referrals and maintaining your certification standards. Long term, there might be opportunities for equipment upgrades through grant funding, or even helping train new processors in other regions. We're trying to build capacity statewide." I agreed immediately. This was exactly the kind of systemic support that could make organic farming more viable across Pennsylvania. By August, I was regularly receiving referrals through the network. Some were one-time jobs, but several turned into ongoing client relationships. The grant funding Dean had mentioned came through in September, allowing me to upgrade my mobile equipment and purchase a specialized density separator that could handle an even wider variety of grains. The business was thriving. More importantly, I felt like I was part of something meaningful. Every load of grain I processed represented a farmer's choice to work with nature rather than against it. Every clean, certified seed lot was a small act of resistance against industrial agriculture's race to the bottom. In October, exactly 18 months after the trial, I got a notification that Patricia had completed her parole requirements. She was no longer prohibited from contacting me, though I doubted she ever would. Her restitution payments were being garnished from her wages at some retail job in Ohio, and according to the terms of the civil settlement, those payments would continue for years. I didn't feel triumphant about her situation. If anything, I felt sad that someone had been so consumed by the need for control that they destroyed their own life. Patricia had had a nice house, a stable marriage, a position of respect in the community. She'd thrown it all away because she couldn't tolerate someone doing something she didn't personally approve of. There was a lesson in that, one I thought about as I continued my work with the HOA board. Communities need rules, but they also need flexibility and grace. They need standards, but they also need room for people to live meaningful lives in different ways. The balance was delicate, and it required constant attention and goodwill. By November, as the harvest season wound down and the processing work slowed to winter levels, I had time to reflect on everything that had happened. 2 years ago, I'd been a target. Now, I was an established part of both the local community and the regional agricultural network. My business was strong. My relationships with neighbors were good. My work had expanded beyond anything I'd imagined when I first bought the property. Cole was becoming an invaluable partner, taking on more responsibility, and showing real aptitude for the technical aspects of grain processing. We talked about him eventually becoming a co-owner, building this into something that could outlast my involvement and serve farmers for decades. In December, the HOA board hosted another holiday party. This time, we had nearly 100 people show up, including several farmers I worked with. Marcus brought his family. Sarah came with fresh baked bread made from flour milled from wheat I'd processed. The Amish cooperative sent representatives with donated food for the potluck. It felt like a true community gathering, mixing longtime residents with the farming families whose work sustained the region. Kids ran around while adults talked and laughed. There was no tension, no drama, just people enjoying each other's company. Tom found me near the food table and handed me a cookie. "You know, Yates, when you moved in 3 years ago, I thought you were a little crazy for buying a property in an HOA with a business like yours. Figured you'd either have to sell the business or move within a year." There were times I thought the same thing. But you didn't. You fought for what was right and you changed this place for the better. That takes guts. I accepted the compliment with a nod, but privately, I didn't think of it as guts. I'd just been trying to live my life and do work that mattered. The fight with Patricia had been forced on me, not something I'd sought out. Maybe that was the real lesson. Sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about being confrontational or aggressive. It's just about refusing to be pushed out of a space where you belong. It's about knowing your rights, documenting everything, and staying calm even when someone is trying to provoke you. As winter settled over Lancaster County, I spent the quiet months maintaining equipment, planning for the next season, and working on my responsibilities with the HOA board. We revised several more sections of the covenant, always with an eye toward clarity and reasonableness. We established an ombudsman process so residents could raise concerns without immediately escalating to formal complaints. We created a community garden on unused common land, which several residents used to grow vegetables. The board was functioning well. Robert was an excellent president, collaborative and thoughtful. Linda kept meticulous records. Deborah brought good business sense to financial decisions. And Frank, who'd initially supported Patricia, had become one of the most reasonable voices on the board, perhaps chastened by his earlier mistakes. In February, I received notification that my civil settlement with Patricia had been fully paid. Between her insurance payout and the garnished wages, the entire debt had been satisfied. That chapter was now completely closed. Spring arrived again, bringing another busy season. Cole and I processed loads of grain as farmers prepared for planting. The network referrals kept coming. The mobile service had become popular enough that we were considering buying a second mobile unit to handle demand. One March morning, I was in the barn calibrating equipment when I heard a car pull up. I walked outside and was surprised to see Linda Mortensen. "Linda, what brings you out here?" She smiled. "Official HOA business, actually. The board has been talking and we'd like to feature your business in our community newsletter. We want residents to understand what you do and how it connects to larger sustainability goals. Would you be willing to write something or do an interview?" "Sure, I'd be happy to." The newsletter article ran in April. It included photos of the seed cleaner, descriptions of the process, and quotes from farmers I worked with. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Several residents reached out to say they'd had no idea what seed cleaning involved or how important it was to organic farming. One email came from a high school science teacher who lived in the development. She asked if I'd be willing to give a presentation to her environmental science class about sustainable agriculture and local food systems. I agreed, and that presentation led to others. By the end of the school year, I'd spoken at 3 different schools and a local Rotary club. Each presentation was an opportunity to explain how agricultural systems actually worked, how organic certification mattered, and why supporting regional food production was important. The students, especially, seemed genuinely interested. Several told me they'd never thought about where their food came from beyond the grocery store. In June, Marcus invited me to his farm for a celebration. His family had owned the land for 5 generations, and they were officially certifying an additional 50 acres as organic, bringing their total organic production to over 200 acres. "Couldn't have done it without reliable processing," Marcus said, raising a glass of lemonade during the celebration. "You made this viable for us, Yates. Thank you." Standing there in Marcus's field, surrounded by farmers and their families, I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with business success or legal victories. This was about being part of a community that was trying to do things right, to work with the land rather than exploit it, to build systems that would sustain both people and ecosystems for generations. The lawsuit, the harassment, the vandalism all felt very far away. Patricia's vendetta had nearly derailed everything, but in the end, it had just been noise. The real story was here in this field with these farmers, doing work that mattered. Summer rolled on. Cole and I processed record volumes. The equipment ran smoothly. The business grew steadily. The HOA board continued to function well, without drama or power struggles. Meadowbrook Estates had become a genuinely pleasant place to live, a community that balanced standards with flexibility, rules with reason. In August, I got a call from Dean Foster at the certification board. "Yates, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're announcing the statewide processing network at a conference in Harrisburg next month. We'd like you to be part of the panel discussion about regional food systems. You interested?" I was. The conference brought together farmers, processors, food distributors, and policymakers to discuss Pennsylvania's agricultural future. The panel discussion focused on infrastructure challenges, and I was able to talk about the importance of accessible, high-quality processing for small and mid-sized organic operations. After the panel, several people approached me with questions and ideas. A woman from Center County was thinking about starting a processing business and wanted advice. A farmer from York County was frustrated with his current processor and asked if I could handle his grain. A state agriculture official asked if I'd be willing to consult on a study about processing capacity gaps in Pennsylvania. I said yes to all of it. The business was strong enough now that I could afford to take on some consulting work and mentoring. Cole was capable of running day-to-day operations when I needed to be elsewhere. By September, as another harvest season reached its peak, I realized how far I'd come not just since the HOA fight, but since I'd started the business years ago. What had begun as a one-person operation processing grain in a barn had become a regional resource, a training ground for new processors, and a model for sustainable agriculture infrastructure. The property in Meadowbrook Estates, which Patricia had tried so hard to drive me away from, had become exactly what I'd hoped for when I bought it. A place where I could do meaningful work while being part of a community. The barn she tried to force me to empty was now a hub of activity, processing grain from dozens of farms across multiple counties. In October, the community held another annual meeting. The board elections were routine. Robert, Linda, and I were all re-elected. Frank decided to step down, and a younger resident named Amy took his place. Deborah remained as treasurer. During the meeting, Robert gave a state of the community address. He talked about property values, which had actually increased over the past 2 years. He discussed community events, which had better attendance than ever. And he talked about the importance of supporting diverse uses of residential property, as long as those uses aligned with community values. "We learned some hard lessons a couple years ago," Robert said. "We learned that rigid enforcement of arbitrary interpretations doesn't make a community stronger. What makes us stronger is supporting residents who are doing good work, work that reflects well on all of us. Yates Patterson's business is a perfect example of that. He's not just running a successful operation. He's supporting sustainable agriculture throughout the region. That's something we should be proud to have in our community." People applauded, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded room. After the meeting, as people mingled over cookies and coffee, Janet Cooper came up to me. "You know, Yates, I've been thinking about what you do, and I'd like to visit one of the farms you work with, see where the grain comes from. Would any of your clients be open to that?" "I'm sure several would. Let me make some calls." 2 weeks later, I organized a farm tour. 10 residents from Meadowbrook Estates joined me for a visit to Marcus's farm. He showed us his fields, explained his organic practices, and talked about the challenges of sustainable farming. Then we drove to my barn, where I demonstrated the seed cleaning process. Everyone was fascinated. They asked questions, took photos, and talked about how they'd never really understood what organic certification involved. Several bought flour and other products made from grain processed through my equipment. As we wrapped up, Janet pulled me aside. "This should be a regular thing, like an annual event or something. Connect the community with local agriculture." It was a good idea. The HOA board approved it, and it became a fall tradition. Each October, we'd organize tours connecting Meadowbrook Estates residents with local farms and food producers. It strengthened the community while also supporting local agriculture. Win-win. By the end of that second year after the trial, as winter settled in again, I had time to really take stock of everything. The business was thriving beyond my initial projections. I'd processed grain for 43 different farms over the course of the year. The mobile service had expanded to cover 6 counties. Coal had become a full partner in the operation, and we were already planning to hire another assistant for the coming year. The HOA had transformed from a source of stress into a functional, reasonable governing body. I'd gone from fighting for my right to operate my business to helping shape community policy in ways that supported diverse uses of residential property while maintaining quality of life. My relationships with neighbors had deepened. Tom and I had become close friends. Janet had become an advocate for local food systems. Even residents I didn't know well would wave or stop to chat when they saw me around the development. Most importantly, the work itself remained fulfilling. Every time a farmer delivered grain, every time the seed cleaner hummed to life, every time I packaged cleaned seeds for certified organic use, I was contributing to something larger than myself. I was part of a network of people trying to build more sustainable, more resilient food systems. Patricia's attempt to shut me down felt like ancient history now, a brief storm that had tested me but ultimately made everything stronger. The barn still stood. The equipment still ran. The work continued, and that, in the end, was what mattered most. Not the conflict, not the legal victories, not even the expansion of the business. What mattered was that I'd been able to keep doing work that aligned with my values, work that served farmers and communities, work that contributed to building the kind of world I wanted to live in. The certified letter that had arrived on that Tuesday morning 2.5 years ago had seemed like a crisis. Looking back, it was just the beginning of a much longer and more important story. A story about standing up for yourself, yes, but also about building community, supporting sustainable systems, and finding meaning in daily work. As I locked up the barn on a cold December evening, watching my breath fog in the winter air, I felt deeply grateful. Grateful for the farmers who trusted me with their grain. Grateful for neighbors who'd supported me. Grateful for a community that had learned and grown from conflict. Grateful for work that mattered and a place to do it. The lights of my house glowed warm through the dusk. Beyond the barn, the hills of Lancaster County rolled away into shadows. Somewhere out there, fields lay dormant under winter frost, waiting for spring and another planting season. When that season came, farmers would bring their grain to my barn and the cycle would continue. Patricia had tried to break that cycle, to remove the equipment and shut down the operation. She'd failed, and in failing, she'd inadvertently made everything more resilient. The business had grown stronger. The community had become more thoughtful. The relationships had deepened. I walked back to the house, my boots crunching on gravel, already thinking about the coming season. There were equipment upgrades to plan, new client relationships to develop, and always more grain to process. The work would continue, the barn would keep standing, and the seed cleaner would keep running. That was all I'd ever wanted. The chance to do meaningful work in a place I could call home. Despite everything Patricia had done to stop me, I'd succeeded. The community had succeeded. And in the end, that made all the difference.